Contact. Hi, I'm Fred Nunes.
And I'm Wendy.
And welcome to Nunes Vineyard. We've been working with Papa Pietro Perry Winery now since about 2008. And they make a single vineyard designate where they source the fruit from our vineyard to make the Nunes Vineyard Pinot Noir. When we were first trying to determine what to grow here, one of the first tenets of determining what to plant in a vineyard is to take into account the market. So first we had to be looking at a variety that was viable in the market. And at the time, Pinot Noir actually was not that popular. It was more Cabernet at that time. But when I got into viticulture school and found out that it was all predicated upon several different factors, the most important of which seemed to be the mesoclimate. So the mesoclimate is the general weather in the area, and we happen to be on this unique spot on the earth where we have a confluence of maritime layers of air that when we have up canyon heating towards Healdsburg to the north of us, it creates a low pressure that draws the higher pressure marine layers in from Bodega Bay to our west, and from the south, San Pablo Bay, and we get the confluence right where we are, and it's a very narrow band. It's no more than a couple miles wide north and south, and it goes from the mountains in Sebastopol all the way to the east and bumps up against the Mayacama Mountains. So here we have this area where we accumulate so many degree days that allow us to grow Pinot Noir without losing all the acid from hot temperatures like we have, say, over in the Central Valley. So as far as determining what clones to plant, once we figured out that we were going to be growing Pinot Noir, I looked into the whole lore of Pinot Noir and found out that there are different Burgundian varieties that come from France. And I read everything I could, and I found out that we mirrored almost exactly the northern growing region in Burgundy, or the Côte d'Or. And up around Dijon in the Côte d'Or, they had certain clones that they had determined make this Burgundian style wine. And those were the 115, 667, 777, and 114 clones of Pinot Noir. So we went to the nurseries, found out that we could source those clones. And in 1998, we sourced the clones, and they went out and grafted them at the nursery and got them all prepared to plant in the year 2000. So I planted at the same percentage of each clone that the Chateau Romani Conti in Burgundy planted. So at least I knew I was headed down the right track without really knowing all about Pinot Noir at that time. So we went ahead and planted in 2000 and had those clones. Later on, we found out that each winemaker has their own idea on what clones constitute their style of wine that they like to make. And then based on the variety of characters that we generated on this vineyard because of the soil type. So we have this soil that's like a marble cake of soils where each one of the clones expressed itself with a little bit different character. And we were able to allow the winemakers to come in, like Ben and Bruce. They would come in and taste the fruit and look at how they expressed, and were able to make the determination that they needed these clones at this amount to make the style of wine that they were looking for. And we decided that we would not do what a lot of vineyards do, is they will turn the soil over down to 7 feet down. They'll turn the soil over. What we did not want to do was take this alluvial layer, 10 inches of soil in the top, that's a mixture of sand, silt, clay at varying densities. Underneath, we did not want to mix it in with that heavier, dense clay. So we left it all in place, and in studying where those soil types were, we saw that the vineyard was like a marble cake of what they call lenses, like a sand lens or a gravel lens. Each one of these areas, each clone and each vine will express differently in their character. So we have over the years learned where those areas were. We have one area in the vineyard that we find kind of interesting. We call it our jungle block, and it's a underground reservoir that has like a spring that goes through this one area of the vineyard. I think we're going to get an overhead shot of it. And the vines are much more vigorous in this one area. So it has happened in the past, and every year we look at this. Sometimes we have to go in and harvest differently in one area of a block compared to the other. So sometimes we have let the jungle block, because it's growing greener, it's going to extend all the timelines out. We harvest that later. We'll come in and harvest that at a different time in order to get just the right characters that the winemaker's looking for to make his style of wine.
And I like to say that all 10 blocks in our vineyard are express themselves differently. Even if we have two different blocks of 777, but they're very different from each other. The row orientation is different. The soil type is a little bit different in different areas of the vineyard. It's all shallow clay loam, but some blocks produce different flavors than the others. So that's another factor.
Well, as far as the soil type goes, when we first started trying to learn about this exact spot and what the characters were and how or if we should make any adjustments to how we planted what we planted, I found out that the third most important thing in determining what goes on in the vineyard is the soil type. So in studying the soil, we found out that we are in an alluvial plain where in the past the water would come off of the Mayakama Mountains to the east of us and drain into the Santa Rosa Plain and create a lake. This property happens to be right at the edge of that annual lake that would form every year. So as the water came out of the mountains at a higher velocity coming down slope, the heavier elements would drop out of the water, would filter out as the water slowed down coming onto the plain. And it deposited the heavier elements of sand early in the vineyard, and then as it progressed out to the west, the water slowed down and the finer particles of soil would filter out and accumulate. So at the upper part of the vineyard, we have a soil texture of sand, silt, clay, which is more sand. And as we progress down the vineyard over the 40 acres, we get a finer silt down more towards the east of the vineyard, which makes for a very different characteristic as you look at the cation exchange capacity or the ability of the soil to have mobile nutrients. So all the soil has nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but the ability of those cations, that fertilizer, to be available to the plant, it has to be able to be mobile when there's water in the soil. So in the heavier clay down near the bottom of the vineyard where the finer materials filtered out, we have very little nutrient mobility, so the plants are naturally devigored. whereas in the upper part of the vineyard, there's a little bit more vigor. That becomes very important in that when you're growing wine grapes, it's counterintuitive. You don't want it to be too vigorous, or the plants will never stop growing green. And the cycle of the plant will remain green all the way till harvest, where it'll make sugar. So what we do is we planted where we didn't disturb the soil. We're only in 10 inches of soil until we hit a pretty hard clay layer. That 10 inches of soil planted with the choice of an SO4 rootstock, which is a very devigored rootstock. It's a cross between Berlandieri and riparian rootstock, and that devigors the plant so that at mid-growing cycle, the plant will stop growing green and will start lignifying or oxidizing and ripening. So for the 120-day growing season, the first part of the growing season, 60 days, we pull the water back slightly. We create a little bit of deficit, water deficit in the root ball. That creates a drought situation. The root ball ceases producing gibberellic acid, which signals the plant to grow green, and that drought, that little bit of drought that we introduce into the root ball, starts creating abscisic acid, which signals the plant to stop growing green, and anything that was produced during the green phase, the early precursors of color, flavor, and aroma, now for the next 60 days will oxidize into color, flavor, and aroma. And we can do that because we planted on SO4 rootstock in only 10 inches of soil. It gives us tremendous control over that green growth that produces precursors and then sits there and oxidizes into color, flavor, and aroma.